The glass of lemonade was still beading with condensation on the porch steps when 5-year-old Samuel Russell vanished from a suburban neighborhood in Knoxville, Tennessee, population 12,004. It was a sun-drenched June afternoon in 1963. Towering oak trees cast deep shade, and the drone of cicadas drowned out the distant church bells. At 5:42 p.m., the Russells' neighbor, Mrs. Ida Morton, glanced out her kitchen window and saw the blond boy in a green striped t-shirt playing with his red tin toy truck on the front lawn. Samuel was pushing the truck along the wooden fence, his white sneakers leaving prints in the damp soil. When she looked again just minutes later, the little gate stood wide open, and the yard was empty. What happened in the next 20 minutes would haunt Knoxville for more than half a century. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss the latest cases. In the summer of 1963, Knoxville was still a small town in eastern Tennessee where the main streets were shaded by oaks and the drugstore signs were sun-bleached and peeling. Life moved slowly. People greeted each other by name. Kids played in the streets, and adults sat on their porches listening to the news and Elvis Presley records on the radio. On the edge of town, in a modest wooden house, the Russell family lived a simple life like any other Southern family. John Russell, 36, was a quiet, sturdy carpenter at the lumber mill near the river. He left early every morning in his old pickup. Eleanor, 32, taught at the local elementary school, patient, careful, the kind of person who kept everything neat and orderly. Their son, Samuel, 5 years old, blond, sun-tanned, and always smiling, was the kid who made the neighbors grin when they saw him racing around the yard with the silver tin truck he called his best friend. On hot afternoons, Eleanor would read on the porch while Samuel splashed in a bucket of water. His laughter mixed with the cicadas and the hum of the fan made the house feel cooler. Mother and son shared a quiet, close bond. Every night before bed, Samuel begged her to tell him again about the star in the sky that he believed was his friend. That morning, the sky was clear and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass. John kissed his wife and son goodbye, reminding Samuel, "Help your mom and stay out of the road." Eleanor hung laundry on the line, watching her boy play in the yard with the familiar contentment of routine. Around mid-morning, a strange woman appeared on the dirt road in front of the house. She wore a pale green dress, her blonde hair tied back in a bun, and carried a small purse. She stopped at the gate and asked softly, "I'm looking for the Whitmore place. Is it this way?" Eleanor smiled, pointed west, and the woman thanked her and walked on, her low-heeled shoes leaving faint prints in the dust. Samuel stood close to the fence, watching her until she disappeared behind the trees. Eleanor barely registered it, just a passing figure, and went back inside. The midday sun beat down hard. The radio played slow songs while Samuel played alone in the yard. When Eleanor brought out a glass of lemonade, she saw only the silver tin truck lying on its side by the steps, its wheels still spinning slightly. She called his name calmly at first, thinking he was hiding in the bushes. No answer. She called louder, stepped into the road, looked toward the neighbors' houses, and asked, "Anybody seen Sammy?" Heads shook. Panic rose fast. She ran around the yard, the alley, the field, sweat and fear mixing as her mind spun with silent questions. When John got home from the mill, Eleanor met him at the door crying that their son was gone. They split up, searching the main road, shouting until their voices cracked, knocking on every door. Some neighbors said they hadn't noticed anything, others mentioned hearing a truck pass by or seeing the gate standing open. The sun sank. Shadows stretched long, and the air thickened with dread. Eleanor stood in the middle of the yard, clutching the little straw hat she'd found on the porch steps, hands shaking, not knowing what to do next. In desperation she went inside, picked up the rotary phone, dialed, and choked out to the operator that her son had disappeared. The call was routed to the Knox County Sheriff's Office. When the dispatcher patched her through to Sheriff Harold Whitman, something in the woman's voice made him drop everything and head out. In more than 10 years as sheriff, he'd handled plenty of kids wandering off into the woods or over to a friend's house, but the way Eleanor kept repeating the word disappeared, told him this was different. The road into the Russells' neighborhood had almost no streetlights. When Harold arrived, only the patrol car headlights cut through the red dust, and the cluster of neighbors gathered at the gate. Eleanor sat on the porch steps, staring blankly, still clutching the straw hat. John stood beside her, rigid and silent. Harold stepped out of the car, ordered the scene preserved, and walked over to the couple. He asked brief questions about the last time they saw the boy. Eleanor recounted, voice hoarse from calling his name hundreds of times. Samuel was playing in the yard. She went inside for just a few minutes, and when she came back, he was gone. Harold had the floodlights turned on and swept across the area. The wooden gate hung open. Narrow tire tracks were visible in the dirt. He crouched to examine them, likely a small truck or station wagon. One officer was sent west along the road to look for matching tracks. Harold ordered the neighborhood exit sealed, temporary checkpoints set up, and local gas stations and stores contacted. Inside the house he took Eleanor's detailed statement. The boy was about 3 feet tall, blonde hair, wearing a green striped shirt, denim shorts, barefoot, usually played near the front fence. When he asked if anything unusual had happened, she mentioned the strange woman who had stopped to ask directions that morning. Harold had her describe the woman's appearance and clothing in detail, then radioed the description to dispatch to cross-check against residents within a 5-mile radius. Outside, 4 patrol car floodlights lit up the lawn like daylight. Firefighters and neighbors fanned out searching the property. A tracking dog was brought in and given Samuel's scent from a shirt in his bedroom. The dog followed the trail along the fence, paused at the gate, then circled back. Scent lost. Harold noted it. No trail beyond yard. He ordered the search expanded toward the Tennessee River. When maps arrived, he marked a 1-mile radius around the Russell house and divided it into 4 sectors. By early nightfall the teams returned empty-handed. Volunteer neighbors kept walking the dirt roads with flashlights, calling the boy's name. Their voices echoed with the crickets and the static of police radios. Harold leaned against his car, staring into the dark fields, calculating, if the kid wandered off, he wouldn't have left the area. If he was taken, the hours already passed were enough to be out of the county. He ordered all information compiled, the scene officially cordoned, and a temporary command post set up in the Russells' yard. Maps were spread across a car hood, red dots marking searched areas. A young officer asked if they should alert the press. Harold answered curtly, "Not until we're sure it's an abduction." He went back to Eleanor, briefed her on procedure, and asked for photos of Samuel for internal alerts. She handed him a picture from last year's school picnic, carefully wiping the dust off before placing it in his hand. Harold slipped it into his pocket and looked around. The air was thick with silence. Far off, patrol car lights still swept the dirt road, searching for something that wasn't there. Finally, he signed the case file. Case hash 221, missing child, possible abduction. At dawn, the first search teams were already at the command post in the Russells' yard. Harold set up assignment boards and volunteer lists, mostly neighbors. Teams were divided by direction: north toward the river woods, east to the highway, west across open fields and sparse houses. 4 K9 units arrived, each dog with 2 handlers. Harold stressed silence. No shouting, no disturbing evidence. He reminded them that even a footprint or scrap of cloth could matter. Eleanor sat inside with the door cracked open, staring blankly as rescue teams passed. John joined the western group, calling his son's name as he walked. Morning wind carried dampness from the river, dry leaves rustled underfoot. Along the fence line at the end of the road, officers placed stakes every 10 meters. The lead dog sniffed the weeds, paused at old tire marks, then ran toward the woods. Harold followed, jotting notes in pencil. Under the canopy, light filtered through leaves, dust mixing with morning mist. Men swept the ground meter by meter with flashlights. One volunteer spotted skid marks in the mud, but Harold identified them as animal tracks. The group reached the riverbank, where the summer water ran slow and murky gold. They found a few small footprints, but the water had blurred them, impossible to tell if they were recent. Harold marked the spot and sent divers into the shallows. 2 divers in safety lines went down. Cold water bubbled around them, but 10 minutes later they surfaced shaking their heads. Nothing. Meanwhile, the Eastern team patrolled Highway 11W, setting up checkpoints and checking stores and gas stations. An attendant 4 miles from the Russells remembered selling gas the previous afternoon to a woman driving a cream-colored small truck. She paid cash, said little, and seemed in a hurry. Harold took detailed notes. Late 1950s Ford or Chevrolet, old decal on the rear door, one taillight foggy. The description went out countywide. By noon the heat was stifling. Searchers paused for quick meals, covered in dust. Harold reviewed the map. The woods searched 3 times. Riverbank extended south. Neighboring houses clear. He gave the dogs a 2-hour break, then sent them east. On the highway, patrol officers stopped every similar cream-colored truck. None matched. Back at the house, another team collected more photos of Samuel. A birthday picture from the previous year was enlarged, and 10 copies sent to units. Harold returned late afternoon, sat with Eleanor, and gave a preliminary update. No direct trace yet, but the search would continue through the night. She quietly asked if Samuel could have fallen in the river. Harold said they hadn't ruled anything out. He stepped onto the porch, watched officers loading flyers into cars, and decided to contact local radio station WEIR for an emergency bulletin. The alert was short. Samuel Russell, age 5, missing from West Knoxville yesterday afternoon. Blonde hair, gray eyes, approximately 3 feet tall. Anyone with information contact Knox County Sheriff's Office. It aired that evening between weather reports. Harold listened to the announcer while staring at the wall map covered in red dots spreading along the river. Outside, dozens of people still walked the dirt roads, flashlights flickering in the thick fog. No one spoke much, just footsteps and hoarse calls fading into the descending night. After 24 hours, the search had yielded no clues, but the entire town now understood this was no ordinary lost child case. The next morning, the temporary command post remained in the Russells' yard. After a night of searching with no new finds, Sheriff Harold Whitman shifted focus to witness statements to reconstruct the timeline. He set up a small wooden table, stacks of paper ready, and neighbors were called in one by one. First was Farmer Walter Phelps from the top of the dirt road. He said that afternoon, while watering his garden, he saw a child run along the fence, then turn toward the river. Only saw the back of a striped shirt, wasn't sure it was Samuel. Harold pinned the time as early afternoon when the sun was still high. Note added, movement south, time uncertain. Next was Mrs. Myrtle Hayes across the street. She saw a strange woman that morning, around noon, standing by the Russell fence, leaning down talking to the boy. She clearly remembered the green dress and small purse. When asked why she didn't pay more attention, she said she assumed it was a family friend. Harold pressed for more detail on face, height, hair. She could only say, light hair tied back, fair skin. 13-year-old Billy Morton, who often played with Samuel, said he came by at noon to call his friend, but no one was there, only heard an engine start and stop. When he reached the gate, he saw red dust kick up from the main road, but didn't see the vehicle. Sounded like a small truck. The mail carrier reported meeting a cream-colored vehicle coming the opposite direction early afternoon. Woman driving, blonde hair, sitting very straight, constantly checking her rear-view mirror. Didn't notice the plate. The truck turned toward Highway 11W. All statements were compiled on a large board. Harold and 2 deputies began mapping estimated movements. From Eleanor speaking to the strange woman in the morning to discovering Samuel missing, there was a 2-plus-hour gap. Using the mail carrier and farmer's estimates, Harold marked 3 suspicious points: the Russell yard, the turn toward the river, and the road to the highway. He connected them with red arrows labeled possible small truck movement. Below he wrote, primary direction west, likely escape route. Meanwhile, technicians re-swept the scene. An officer found a few pale green fabric threads caught on the fence latch, possibly clothing. Sample bagged, sealed, sent to the lab. Harold ordered a check of all registered cream or off-white small trucks in the county, 1955, 1962 models. Over 60 were listed, only 4 were registered to women. One was Mary Turner, address South Knoxville, flagged for follow-up. That afternoon, a brief meeting was held in the Russell house with 3 investigators and 2 patrol deputies. Harold presented the movement map and ordered focus on the corridor between the river and highway, the only direction per witnesses where a child or vehicle could leave unseen. Teams were reassigned. One continued riverbank, one rechecked the main road out of town, one revisited gas stations about the cream truck. Before they left, Harold looked at Samuel's photo on the table, the boy beaming in sunlight, and said quietly, "If he was taken, whoever did it planned it." By evening the teams returned with notes, but no solid leads. As darkness fell, Harold sat before the board dense with arrows and names, pieces still scattered, refusing to form a clear picture. Amid the steady chirp of crickets on the porch, he wrote 2 final lines in his log, witness statements conflicting, data gaps. Need verification on cream-colored small truck. On the 3rd morning of the search, while teams swept the Tennessee River banks, according to Harold Whitman's previous map, a volunteer in the southern group spotted a small object half buried in riverside mud. He bent down, lifted it carefully, and recognized a child's light brown shoe, small size, strap broken. Mud covered most of it, but when rinsed in the river, a little embroidered bird on the side was still visible. He radioed immediately. Harold was at command post. He rushed to the scene with 2 forensic technicians. The muddy track to the river was churned with prior search footprints. Harold ordered everyone back, marked a 20-meter radius. He examined the shoe on plastic sheeting and nodded. It matched Eleanor's description of what Samuel wore. A technician measured, recorded coordinates, photographed from 3 angles. Mud samples were taken from the sole and surrounding area for soil comparison and drift analysis. Harold sealed the area with white tape. The summer river ran low and murky, lapping at exposed roots. Investigators searched downstream. A few meters away they found drag marks in the dirt, as if something heavy had fallen and been pulled by the current. Harold extended the search 50 meters downstream and called in divers with tanks and drag nets. While waiting, he drafted a preliminary report on water flow and possible drift origin and contacted the lab in Nashville to ready equipment. 2 hours later the divers surfaced, no additional items. The shoe was placed in an evidence box, sealed, labeled E0163. Harold signed it over for transport to Nashville for biological trace analysis. Back at command post he briefed superiors. First item, linked to the victim recovered, highly likely Samuel Russell's shoe. That afternoon local radio reported the find, stating police called it potentially significant evidence in the case shocking Knox County. At the Russell house, Eleanor heard the news and asked to see the shoe. Harold refused, needed for testing. She fell silent, then asked if it meant her son had drowned. Harold said they were exploring every possibility. That evening, the Nashville lab wired results, no blood, no skin or hair. Mud contained minerals specific to the discovery site, not matching soil around the Russell home. Item had been in water at least 2 days. Harold read the report, progress and deadlock at once. Technicians compared shoe size to last year's photo of Samuel, perfect match. In his notebook, high probability item belongs to victim, direct river connection. A supplemental patrol report stated locals near the find site hadn't seen children there in days, supporting the theory the shoe was placed or carried there, not walked to by Samuel himself. Harold convened the investigation team, presented results, and requested the case be reclassified from missing child to possible abduction. Approval came that night. A short press release went to local radio and TV. Knox County Sheriff's Office is now investigating the disappearance of 5-year-old Samuel Russell as a possible abduction. An item believed to belong to the victim was recovered on the Tennessee River bank and is undergoing analysis. Word spread fast across Knoxville. People gathered at the Russell gate, leaving flowers and prayer cards. In the yard, Harold stared at the white tape blocking the path to the river, lights reflecting off the muddy water. The case had entered a new phase. Everyone understood the boy might no longer be nearby. Harold didn't say it aloud, but in his report to superiors, he wrote one brief line: evidence of transport by motor vehicle. Continue tracing origin of cream-colored small truck. After the case was officially classified as a kidnapping, Harold Whitman ordered the office to compile a list of every individual with prior convictions or arrests within a 10-mile radius of the Russell residence. The files were rushed from county headquarters that same night and stacked on his desk. Most were minor offenses, petty theft, public intoxication, disorderly conduct, but one name caught Harold's attention: Frank Dyer, 42 years old, a Korean War veteran, living alone in a log cabin less than a mile from the Russell home. Dyer had been arrested once for threatening behavior in a bar and had been accused of stalking children near the elementary school, though charges were dropped for lack of evidence. Harold circled the name in red ink and ordered 2 deputies to visit him first thing the next morning. Dyer's house sat tucked among the trees, the front yard littered with rusted car shells and empty beer cans. When the deputies knocked, he opened the door looking irritated, unshaven, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Harold introduced himself and explained they just needed to ask a few questions about the afternoon of the disappearance. Dyer answered in a gravelly voice that he didn't know anything and didn't get involved in other people's business. Harold asked for his whereabouts that day. Dyer said he'd stayed home working on his truck and only went out that evening to buy food at the gas station near the highway. When asked if anyone could verify that, he replied that the station attendant would remember him being there around 6 o'clock. Harold sent one deputy to check the alibi. While waiting, he walked around the property and examined the old pickup parked on the side. It was painted silver gray, the tailgate dented, license plate valid. He crouched to study the tire tracks, measuring tread width and pattern, then compared them to the cast taken at the scene. No match. A technician photographed the tires and scraped soil samples from underneath the chassis for comparison. Harold asked a few more questions, but Dyer remained guarded, saying only that he'd heard about the missing boy and figured the kid's probably long gone by now. About an hour later, the deputy returned. The gas station confirmed Dyer had stopped for food exactly as he claimed, though they couldn't pin down the exact time since the store didn't keep receipts. Harold ordered Dyer brought in for a formal statement. In the interview room, he slumped into the chair and answered every question in short sentences. Harold asked if he knew the Russell family. Dyer said only in passing, he'd occasionally run into John at the lumberyard. Asked whether he'd seen a strange woman or a cream-colored pickup in the area, he said he hadn't noticed anything. Harold noted that Dyer avoided eye contact, but showed no obvious signs of nervousness. He offered a polygraph. Dyer agreed. After 40 minutes, the chart showed physiological fluctuations, but nothing conclusive. The examiner's verdict, inconclusive, cannot determine truthfulness or deception. Harold requested shoe prints and fingerprints. Dyer complied reluctantly. Neither matched the small shoe print found at the scene. The file was updated. Suspect Dyer. No incriminating evidence at this time. Still, Harold remained uneasy. He put Dyer under loose surveillance for several days, but the report showed the man never left his property or met anyone. Word spread quickly through the community that Dyer was the kidnapper, and the sheriff's office had to intervene when angry residents gathered outside his cabin. Harold knew he had to proceed carefully. Without evidence, any rash move could ruin the case. He wrote in his notebook that a potential suspect had been identified, but nothing could yet be proven, and he ordered the office to continue screening criminal records from neighboring counties. Before leaving the station that night, Harold glanced through the observation glass at Dyer, sitting motionless, fists clenched, staring into space. He couldn't tell whether it was the look of a guilty man or an innocent one wrongly accused, but he knew they were still groping in the dark, and the 5-year-old boy remained unfound. After the Dyer interview ended without concrete results, Harold Whitman returned to the remaining physical evidence in the file. Among the items sealed from the first day at the scene, he focused on the report labeled tire impressions near west fence. Photographs and soil samples had been taken, but no precise comparison had been possible because the forensic lab lacked equipment at the time. Now Harold ordered the casts reopened and asked technicians to examine tread pattern, width, and wheelbase in detail. They used rulers and rubber molds to create three-dimensional replicas, then compared them against technical manuals of common regional tires. The impressions showed a double V tread design, 9.5 inches between grooves, rear tires typical of 1955, 1959 Ford or Chevrolet light trucks. Harold made a note. Those tires were standard on the small pickups common in the area at the time. He requested the Knox County Vehicle Registration Office to print a list of every cream or white-colored truck of that vintage still legally registered. Over 50 records arrived. Harold and two detectives narrowed them down, eliminating vehicles too far away or owned by government agencies. 12 civilian trucks remained, 3 of them registered to women. He set those files aside with addresses and assigned a team to canvass gas stations, warehouses, and parking lots south of Knoxville, anywhere the truck might have gone within the time frame. By late afternoon, the first lead came in. A small station at the junction of Highway 11W and the Industrial Road reported a cash transaction on the day of the disappearance to a woman who signed Mary Turner. Harold sent deputies to retrieve the original receipt. It was handwritten, ink faded, recording the date and gallons sold, but no license plate. Only the buyer's signature at the bottom. Under the desk lamp, the name Mary Turner slanted right, the T drawn with a long downward stroke. Harold read it several times. Something felt like it was clicking into place. The time on the receipt fell roughly 1 hour after Eleanor Russell called the police. If a woman driving a cream-colored pickup had left the area, this could be the first real clue to her direction. He ordered a search of every resident named Mary Turner in the county. None matched. Civil records showed only 2 women by that name in the adjacent county, both elderly and without vehicles. Harold noted, possibly alias. The receipt was resealed in a new evidence bag labeled E0463, described as transaction possibly linked to cream-colored pickup. He instructed the technician to photograph the signature and forward it to the handwriting analysis section in Nashville for future comparison. Then he returned to the map room, pinned a copy of the receipt to the main board, and drew a red line to the gas station. The team stood silent for a moment, staring at the crowded map. The suspected truck's route was starting to take shape from the Russell house along the dirt road southwest, a stop at the station near the highway, then gone. Harold ordered the search expanded to neighboring counties along Highway 11W, and asked state troopers to watch for any matching truck. When night fell, he sat alone in his office with the duplicate receipt folded in front of him, the ink still dark on the capital M. He added to the internal report. Witness and physical evidence strongly suggest the woman driving the cream pickup under the name Mary Turner is directly involved. Identify subject and trace movements. The receipt was entered into the master file, stamped, and from that moment, the case was no longer just conflicting statements. It finally had a real, if fragile lead pointing toward a woman no one had yet seen. 3 days after the Mary Turner gas receipt was officially entered, Harold Whitman held the first press conference since the case began. The Knox County Sheriff's headquarters was packed with local reporters and a few television crews from Nashville. He stepped to the podium, clutching a short prepared statement, announcing that the investigation was now being treated as a kidnapping and appealing to the public for any information about a woman driving a cream-colored pickup truck between noon and late afternoon on the day Samuel disappeared. A large photograph of the boy hung behind him with the words, "Missing, 5-year-old boy" in bold letters on black. Harold spoke slowly, avoiding speculation, stressing only that the department was doing everything possible. The conference aired live on WFK radio, and within hours dozens of calls flooded the tip line. By nightfall there were hundreds. Some claimed to have seen the truck heading east. Others swore they saw the child on a Greyhound bus or heard crying near the woods. Harold formed an 8-person team to man the phones around the clock and log every detail. After 24 hours, not a single tip panned out. Several calls were obvious pranks. One man claimed to know where the boy was held and demanded ransom. Tracing the call led only to a payphone in a bar. Media pressure mounted. Newspapers ran front-page stories with headlines like "Mysterious Knoxville Boy Kidnapping" and "Cream Pickup, the Only Clue." Every morning Harold faced a crowd of reporters outside headquarters firing questions. He stuck to "We're following all leads." Meanwhile, neighborhoods along the Tennessee River formed their own search parties. Spontaneous hunts spread across fields and forests, many uncoordinated, trampling potential evidence. Harold had to assign deputies to control the civilians and beg the public to route all efforts through official channels. At the Russell home, neighbors left flowers and candles on the porch steps, taped Samuel's picture to utility poles, store windows, city buses. The boy's story consumed the town. People spoke of the cream pickup as if it were a ghost that had passed through their quiet lives. The local radio station launched a special segment, "Find Samuel," taking live calls. Among hundreds of stories, only a handful were specific enough to check. Patrols followed up, but every lead dead-ended. The truck someone saw turned out to be a delivery van. The child at the bus station didn't match the description. As public attention peaked, the line between helping and gawking blurred. Strangers gathered outside the Russell fence, staring in as if watching a public tragedy. Eleanor kept the curtains drawn and stopped answering the door, only stepping out occasionally to light fresh candles. Harold tried to shield the investigation from the frenzy, but he knew each fruitless day eroded community trust. That weekend, to calm things, he appeared on the evening news, voice weary but firm, asking people to stop spreading rumors and stating the department still had the investigation under control. Yet the next morning new flyers appeared all over Knoxville, asking in bold letters, "Who kidnapped little Russell?" alongside unverified theories. In his office, Harold stared at stacks of false tips and felt the weight. He underlined 2 lines in his work log: "Public fully mobilized, actual results, 0. Public opinion now driving the case." Still, amid the chaos of rumors and useless calls, he believed that somewhere in those hundreds of voices might be one true detail, and their job was to find it before the whole town burned itself out. As public frenzy began to subside and volunteer searches dwindled, Harold Whitman refocused on compiling all remaining physical evidence. The Nashville lab reported that the soil sample from the shoe found by the river had been compromised in storage. The evidence bag had torn, and there was no longer enough material to analyze mineral ratios or stratigraphy. Harold read the report, tossed it on the desk, feeling another piece slip away. He phoned the lab director for an explanation. He was told it was due to humidity in the warehouse and transport in an unrefrigerated vehicle. The geological provenance of the soil was now worthless. At the same time, while reviewing scene logs, the case clerk discovered that the original tire track diagram and first sector map were missing from the main cabinet. 2 photographic reports of the scene had vanished, cause unknown, possibly misfiled during copying. Harold ordered a complete search of archives. Nothing turned up. Without the originals, pinpointing the exact location of the tire marks near the fence would rely only on memory and blurry images in the summary report. The investigation was practically stalled. He wrote in his log, "Loss of samples, loss of records, recovery unlikely." Outside, Knoxville entered July under brutal sun. Search teams were exhausted after weeks in the field. The initial emergency budget was nearly spent, volunteers drifting back to their jobs. Harold met with his detectives and admitted the grim reality: too little evidence, too few men, outdated equipment. He proposed suspending large-scale searches to restructure data and await further forensic results. In the internal memo to county administration he wrote, "Evidence collection and storage procedures fall below standard, preservation methods inadequate, technical personnel undertrained, recommend full procedural review." The report was stamped, but received only a brief note from above. "Continue within allocated budget." Harold sat staring at the investigation board, now stained and sagging, the red strings connecting meaningless points. Behind him, deputies quietly packed away search gear. rolling up caution tape and taking down maps. At the Russell house the crowds were gone, only a few rain-streaked photos remained. Eleanor still left the porch light on all night, waiting for a knock that never came. Harold visited and told her they were pausing field operations, but would continue through records and lab work. She only nodded. As he left, the porch light shone through the frosted glass, her small silhouette motionless in the empty living room. Back at headquarters he wrote the day's final entry: manpower and resources insufficient. Need systemic overhaul to proceed. Field search suspended. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and left the room dark with useless maps, while outside the Tennessee River flowed on, carrying the heavy silence of an investigation forced to stop halfway. August 1963, almost 2 months after the disappearance was reported, the Knox County Sheriff's Office investigation officially stalled. Search teams had been withdrawn. The lab had no new samples to test, and every avenue led back to square one. Harold Whitman still came to the office daily, sitting in front of the dusty investigation board, trying to rearrange the scattered pieces. The shoe by the river, the Mary Turner gas receipt, contradictory witness statements. None were strong enough to support charges or name a suspect. The press had moved on, mentioning the case only occasionally, in short items, as one of Tennessee's sad summer mysteries. Harold received notice from the state attorney general's office that funding for the case was exhausted and all field operations must cease. He did not protest, simply signed the closure report. The incident was reclassified. Missing investigation suspended, meaning indefinitely on hold unless new evidence emerged. He read the bold heading 3 times, then signed, feeling as though he were signing a confession of failure. When the notice reached the Russell home, it was met with silence. John sat for hours on the porch, staring at the empty road. Eleanor tried drafting a petition to reopen the case. She gathered every document, photograph, and press release, and hand-wrote a 4-page letter to the State Department of Justice begging them to keep searching because a child cannot vanish in broad daylight without a trace. 3 weeks later she received a form reply. We sympathize with the family's pain, but at present there is no legal basis or new evidence to reopen the file. The Russell file remains archived and may be reviewed if additional information is received. The letter was folded and placed inside the family Bible on the small altar. From then on the house sank into lasting quiet. Harold heard the news, visited, and brought a complete photocopy of the entire early investigation file. He had no authority to keep originals, but he had quietly copied every page before the files were moved to county archives. Those copies contained everything: scene reports, statements, photographs, search maps, even his private notes never entered officially. He sealed them in a large envelope and locked it in his desk drawer. That night, he sat alone rereading his work journal. The handwriting had grown jagged, blurred by sweat and rain, but he added one final paragraph: no new evidence, no remaining leads. Only the slender hope that the truth is still out there somewhere beyond our reach. When he closed the notebook, the faint streetlights of Knoxville glowed outside, the town returning to its normal rhythm as if no child had ever vanished. The next day, the original files were officially transferred to the Knox County Archives, stamped suspended. Harold signed the transfer log, then walked slowly out of the storage room with the envelope of copies in his coat pocket. He told no one. On the way home, he stopped at the riverbank where the little shoe had been found. The water flowed slowly, sunlight glinting on the surface. He bent, picked up a pebble, threw it in, and watched the ripples spread and disappear. In that moment he understood that with the system they had done everything possible. Yet deep inside, he still could not accept that a child could disappear without any answer at all. When he got back in the car, he opened his work log one last time that day and wrote a short line: Russell file, personal copy retained. Investigation suspended. Then he shut the notebook, started the engine, and drove away from the river, leaving behind an unfinished case and a small town that had just lost its belief in the safety it once thought permanent. 10 years later, in the spring of 1973, Harold Whitman filed for retirement after 30 years of service in law enforcement. His hair had gone almost completely gray, his gait was slow, his voice hoarse from cigarettes and decades of night shifts. The Knox County Sheriff's Office held a small farewell gathering. Colleagues raised glasses in toast, while Harold merely gave a faint smile and said he wanted to retire to spend time with his wife and the garden out back. Few people knew that, just before handing over his badge, he had quietly made another full set of photocopies of the Samuel Russell missing person file, this time neatly organized into 3 black binders, numbered in sequence and labeled Personal File, Confidential. He took them home and locked them in the safe in the basement along with a few old pieces of police gear. In the early years of retirement, Harold kept his habit of rising early, reading the newspaper, then going down to the basement to sit for hours at the wooden table, spreading the pages out and studying them again. He no longer had a badge or investigative authority, but he still took notes, compared details, and reconnected timelines with thin pencil lines. Next to every old newspaper clipping he taped small notes. Possible overlooked witness. Recheck southwest route. Mary Turner. Real name? His personal notebook grew thicker each year. When his wife asked why he remained haunted by a case that had been closed, Harold only whispered that some things, if left unresolved, would not let a man sleep. Occasionally, he carried the files out to the porch in the afternoon, reading while looking across the fields where the wind carried dust from the Tennessee River. In 1975, he decided to send a long letter to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, laying out the entire sequence of events and requesting they consider providing technical assistance. In the letter he wrote clearly, "I believe this was not an ordinary disappearance. There may be an interstate network moving children, and the Russell file is one link. I urge the Bureau to re-examine it using more modern investigative methods." The letter went out by priority mail, accompanied by a concise copy of the file and the old photograph of Samuel. He waited weeks for a reply. When the response envelope finally arrived, it contained only a few pre-printed lines on FBI letterhead. "We acknowledge receipt of the information you provided. At this time, however, there is no federal jurisdiction or evidence to warrant opening an investigation. This file will be retained for reference." Harold read the letter over and over, then folded it and placed it inside the binder without telling anyone. After that, he began keeping a regular journal, each page a brief entry about the case, details he feared time would erase. He wrote about the morning the shoe was found, about the look in Eleanor Russell's eyes when she was told the investigation was being suspended, about the feeling of failure when his superiors refused him. Sometimes he wrote only a single simple line. "No one truly disappears as long as someone still remembers." The yellowed pages were stacked into bundles and tied carefully with string. By the late 1970s, he rarely left the house anymore. His health was failing. Whenever it rained, the sound of water on the tin roof reminded him of the Tennessee riverbank and that small shoe all those years ago. In the basement, inside the locked safe, Harold kept everything: the files, the journals, the FBI letter, and the belief, never shaken, that one day someone would pick up the work he had been forced to leave unfinished. After Harold Whitman retired, the Russell family's life also drifted on in the silence of years without answers. John Russell left Knoxville in early 1965, 2 years after the disappearance. He told neighbors he was moving to Texas to work for a construction company, then vanished from sight. No one knew whether he ever actually arrived or had simply chosen to forget everything. A few postcards came to Eleanor in the first years, short, asking how she was, then nothing more. All contact ended when the return address ceased to exist. Eleanor stayed in the old wooden house where her little boy's laughter had once echoed. She continued teaching at the town elementary school for a few more years, then retired due to poor health. The house became a scene frozen in time. Samuel's room was kept exactly as it had been the day he vanished. The bed still had its green plaid blanket, the tin truck sat on the shelf, the family photographs on the wall had not been moved even an inch. Every morning Eleanor swept, dusted the desk, opened the windows to let the light pour in, as if waiting for the boy to walk back in at any moment. Neighbors rarely saw her leave the house, except to go to the market or to church. She spoke little, answering only when necessary, and always steered away from questions about the past. Some said that in the late afternoons they could hear her softly reciting a short prayer aloud in her son's room. In 1970, a young reporter from the Knoxville News-Sentinel knocked on her door, saying he wanted to write a follow-up story for the 7th anniversary of the disappearance. Eleanor politely declined the interview, saying only, "There's nothing to say, because nothing has changed." The article was published anyway, with the old photo of Samuel sitting on the porch steps and the headline, "A Knoxville Boy. 7 years, still no answers." The story drew brief attention, then quickly sank back into oblivion among countless newer headlines. In later years, whenever newspapers ran retrospectives on unsolved missing children cases in the state, Samuel Russell's name appeared briefly in the list, with the note "missing since 1963, remains unfound." No new details, no updates, just the name and the date. Eleanor clipped those paragraphs, pressed them flat in an old notebook, and kept it in her desk drawer. For her, preserving them was not about hope. It was fear that if she did not keep them, no one else would remember. Occasionally, volunteers from charities or retired officers stopped by to ask whether she needed help or had any new information. Eleanor only smiled and shook her head. She no longer believed in investigations, yet she blamed no one. In the winter of 1978, Knoxville had a heavy snowfall, and people said Mrs. Russell's little house stayed lit all night. She had grown used to leaving a lamp burning in Samuel's room every evening so the boy can see his way home. Time passed. The neighborhood changed, new houses went up, and almost everyone who had lived there at the time of the disappearance moved away. The Russell house became a quiet landmark, something no one wanted to talk about, but everyone knew. In 1980, a Tennessee television station produced a program about unsolved cases of Tennessee and came to the door again. Eleanor allowed filming of the exterior, but refused to appear. In the broadcast segment, the camera panned across the child's bedroom window, where the small lamp still glowed against the white snow, and the narrator said, "Sometimes memory outlives every verdict." After that, Samuel Russell's name surfaced on television now and then, as a symbol of inexplicable loss. Eleanor, year by year, quietly grew older with the house, still keeping the room untouched, still dusting the little tin truck, still writing short entries in her notebook. "Sunny today, Samuel would be 15. Samuel is 20 now. Mama is still waiting." While the outside world moved on, inside that old Knoxville house time seemed to have stopped on a summer afternoon in 1963, when a child's laughter dissolved into the air and never returned. As Knoxville entered the early 1980s, most people who had witnessed the 1963 disappearance were either elderly or had left town. Only the faded paper files remained quietly in the county archives. Among the few who still remembered the story was Alice Whitman, Harold Whitman's only granddaughter. Born in 1958, she grew up in the little house where her grandfather often recounted old cases. From childhood she heard stories about investigations, patience, and duty. When Harold died in 1982, Alice was a senior majoring in forensic science at the University of Tennessee. She had inherited his discipline and a quiet obsession with justice. After graduation, she was hired directly by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, first in trace evidence analysis, then transferred to the newly formed Cold Case Division in the mid-1980s. The work consisted mainly of organizing and digitizing old records, sorting by region and date. In her first days on the job, Alice spent hours in the stuffy archive room among thousands of cardboard boxes with peeling labels. When she opened a file bearing Harold Whitman's signature on the first page, she paused for a long time. The familiar handwriting brought him back, the man who had carried one unsolved case in his heart his whole life. She did not open it right away. She simply set that file aside. Over the following months, While finishing the cataloging project, Alice began compiling a personal list of old missing persons cases she believed should be re-examined once better technology became available. On that handwritten list of 12 names, the fourth entry read, Russell Samuel, Knoxville, 1963. The letters were small but bold, circled in red pen. No one at TBI knew of her personal connection to the case, and Alice never mentioned it. She saw it only as a silent debt she had to carry. Her task in those years was converting every paper file to microfilm and electronic storage. She checked every page, reordered them chronologically, careful not to lose a single sheet. When she reached the Russell file, she noticed the archived copy was missing many documents. Crime scene diagrams, evidence photos, and the gas receipt were all absent from the master set. Only faded summary pages remained. She wrote, incomplete, missing attachments. Though it was merely a technical note, something inside her insisted the file had to be made whole. In the evenings back at her apartment, she reread passages in the journal her grandfather had left behind, where he had once written, "If the day ever comes when we can read the traces left in soil, rivers and time again, open the Russell file first." That sentence stayed with her. With each year of service, Alice was promoted to full investigator, working many of the state's long-dormant cases, yet whenever she scrolled through the cold case index, her eyes always stopped at the name Russell. Not because it was famous, but because it had never been given an ending. In internal reports, she habitually added a short line beneath any child disappearance cases. Recommend retaining physical evidence for future comparison. Colleagues thought her overly meticulous, but no one objected. By the late 1980s, when TBI's archive moved to computer management, Alice was in charge of entering data for thousands of files, including disappearances from the 1950s and 1960s. When she reached the Russell file, she added a private symbol next to case number 221, 3 small dots, the same Mark Harold had used in his journal for cases that were never closed. That night, she printed a copy of the file and kept it in her own personal folder, the same way her grandfather once had. She didn't know exactly why she did it. She only felt that some stories should not be buried under archive dust. At 30 years old, Alice understood that investigative work was not only about finding perpetrators, it was also about keeping the memory of the forgotten alive. And on the long daily list of cases she handled, Samuel Russell remained the one name she never deleted. In the fall of 1995, in the town of Dayton, Ohio, a 37-year-old man named Michael Turner went to the county clerk's office to obtain a certified copy of his birth certificate in order to complete his marriage paperwork. When the clerk scanned his name, the system returned "no record found." Michael assumed it was a typing error, but after they searched again using both his social security number and date of birth, the result was still blank. His records did not exist in the Ohio State database or in the federal archives. The clerk looked at him with confusion and suggested he might have been born in another state, or that the records had been entered incorrectly years ago. Michael found it strange. He had always believed he was born in Dayton, and that his mother Mary Turner had told him he was her biological son, and that his father had died young in a car accident. When he got home, he mentioned it to his mother, but her reaction unsettled him. Mary was silent for a long time, then said the old records had been lost in a fire at City Hall when he was little, and that the clerk at the time had told her it wasn't worth reapplying because the process was too complicated. The explanation sounded reasonable, but Michael caught a flicker of anxiety in her eyes he had never seen before. From that day on, he began noticing small things around the wooden house where they had lived together for decades. In the living room there were old photographs, mostly of Mary in her 30s, but very few of him as a baby, and every existing picture started when he was about 3 or 4 years old. There were no newborn photos, none from the hospital, when he asked. Mary said their camera had been broken back then. Michael didn't press, but a strange feeling settled in him, as if his childhood memories began halfway through a book. A week later, he called the Tennessee Vital Records office, the state his mother had once said she came from, to ask whether his birth might have been registered there. The clerk searched and reported no record for a Michael Turner born in 1958 or 1959, and no interstate transfer paperwork from that period either. The answer deepened his suspicion about his origins. He went through his mother's file cabinet where she kept important papers, deeds, bills, old letters. Among the yellowed documents he found his elementary school enrollment form. The space for place of birth read only unknown, verification pending. He took the paper downstairs to show her. Mary grew angry, snatched it back, and said it was the school's mistake. It was the first time he had ever seen her lose her composure like that. That night, he couldn't sleep. Fragmented memories flooded in, the times he had asked about his father, and she had only said he was a good man, but he couldn't come back. The times he wondered why no relatives ever visited, and she answered, "They live far away and we lost touch." The more he thought about it, the more his childhood seemed full of blank spaces. No documents, no extended family, no one outside his whole life who had ever called him Mary's boy, except Mary herself. He started collecting every suspicious clue. At the high school archives he requested a copy of his admission file, hoping to find an original birth certificate number. But that line was blank too. The elderly records keeper vaguely recalled that students without birth certificates needed a handwritten parental affidavit, and she thought Mary Turner had submitted one, stating child born at home, registration delayed. Michael confronted his mother with this. She brushed it off, saying home births were common back then. But he knew that Dayton had had hospitals and mandatory registration since the 1950s. He didn't argue, he simply continued researching quietly. Later that year he went to the county courthouse to request any adoption records, even though he had never considered himself adopted, and was again told there was no adoption file under the name Mary Turner. Hearing that, a chill settled inside him. He left the courthouse and stood a long time in the rain, trying to remember anything from his past that had ever hinted he was different from the woman who raised him. He recalled her voice, the way she brushed his hair every morning, how tightly she held his hand when they visited neighbors. Those things were real and warm, yet at the same time overly careful, as if she were always afraid of losing him. When he got home, he found her bedroom door locked. The radio inside played low. An old Patsy Cline song drifted out faintly. He knocked, but she didn't open. That evening Mary did not come down for dinner, and the next morning she said she felt unwell and asked him to stop asking about the birth certificate. Michael nodded, but inside he resolved to find answers himself. He made a to-do list, check regional hospital records, contact state authorities again, and see whether the name Mary Turner had ever appeared anywhere else besides Dayton. In a small notebook he wrote one line, "Everyone has a birthday. If mine doesn't exist, the story started somewhere else." In September 2001, Mary Turner died peacefully in her sleep at age 72 after years of heart trouble. Michael stayed beside her until the end. Her eyes opened slightly as if she wanted to say something, then closed again in silence. The funeral was simple. At the local cemetery, attended only by a few neighbors and her former co-workers. Mary left little behind except the small house on the outskirts of Dayton, some old furniture, and a wooden cabinet containing her private papers. After the burial, Michael began sorting through her estate alone, not because he didn't want others touching her things, but because deep down he felt he needed to face whatever past she had hidden. In her bedroom, the dim light from the window fell on the darkened wooden cabinet. The top drawer was locked. He couldn't find the key, so he gently pried it open with a screwdriver. The drawer slid out, releasing the smell of old paper mixed with faded face powder. Inside was a silver tin box, the kind that once held Christmas candy in the 1960s. He lifted the lid, a few folded papers, a tarnished silver necklace, some small photographs, and an unsent letter. On top was an old, faded snapshot, small format, paper yellowed with age. It showed a boy about 5 years old, blond, wearing a striped shirt, sitting on wooden porch steps, behind him a low fence and an open gate. In the bottom corner, handwritten in blue ink, "Sammy, 1963. Michael held the picture a long time. His heart pounded as if he had stumbled on something momentous yet incomprehensible. He had never seen this child, and no one named Sammy existed among his mother's relatives or friends. The photograph was taken on old film, one edge slightly torn, but the word Sammy was perfectly clear, written with the same right slanting hand Mary used on old Christmas cards. He looked through the rest of the photos beneath, mostly Mary at different ages, wearing a nurse's uniform, standing by an old pickup with people he didn't recognize. But no other picture of the boy. Digging deeper, he found only a scrap of paper with unfinished writing. "That day I had no other choice. I only wanted," the sentence broke off. Ink blurred, the rest illegible. Michael sat on the floor and laid everything out in a row. The photo, the letter, the necklace, items that had clearly been cherished for decades. He tried to remember whether his mother had ever mentioned anyone named Sammy. Nothing came. In his memory, Mary had always avoided talking about her life before Dayton, saying only that she had worked in Tennessee and moved north after losing everything. As a child, he had thought she meant her husband. Now, staring at the picture of the unknown boy, he wondered whether losing everything had meant something else entirely. He carried the photo to the window. Daylight through the old glass revealed scratches and dust, but the boy's face remained bright. Eyes looking toward the photographer, a small smile, hands holding a little tin toy truck. An uneasy chill ran through Michael. He thought perhaps it was a friend's child or a nephew, but then why had his mother kept it locked away with her most precious possessions? He placed the picture beside the unsent letter. On the envelope, halfway written, "To Mr. H.A., and then nothing. No address, no last name, just a long ink trail downward. He opened the letter. Inside were only a few disjointed lines. "I know you will never forgive me, but if one day they find out, please tell them I never meant any harm." The handwriting was Mary's, shaky and uneven, probably written while ill. Michael sat motionless, mind reeling. Who were they? Who was the Mr.? And who was the boy in the picture? The questions crowded in until the room seemed to shrink. He felt fear at the realization that he had just touched a part of his mother's past she had hidden for half a century. That night he didn't sleep. He sat at the table turning the photo over and over. The more he looked, the more the boy's eyes seemed strangely familiar, as if somewhere in the mirror he himself had once had that same expression. The next morning he took the tin box downstairs, put everything back inside, sealed it in a large envelope, and wrote on the outside, "Keep, do not open." He wasn't brave enough to investigate further, yet he could not bring himself to throw it away. In the years that followed, the photograph stayed on his desk inside a small glass frame. When anyone asked, he said it was a distant relative. But sometimes, on quiet afternoons, he would stare at the child's smile behind the glass and feel an unnamed turmoil rise inside him. Pity, fear, and the sensation of looking at himself at an age he could not remember. He never learned why his mother had kept that picture for nearly 40 years or who Sammy, 1963, was, but instinctively he understood everything began with that image. He put it back in the frame, wiped away the thin layer of dust, and though he told no one, he kept it in the most visible spot in the room, like an unconscious marker of something still unexplained, a single puzzle piece lying in wait for someone to pick it up and finally tell the whole story his mother had taken with her to the grave. 20 years had passed since Mary Turner's death, yet Michael's life in the Dayton suburbs remained quiet and steady. Still, the old photograph labeled Sammy, 1963, sat on his desk like a crack in his memory. The older he got, the more urgent his need to understand his origins became. In 2015, when Family Tree DNA's online testing kits were heavily advertised, he decided to try one, hoping at least to find distant relatives or confirm he had truly been born in Ohio. He ordered the kit online and received a small package containing a vial and cheek swabs. On a quiet weekend morning, he sat alone in the kitchen, carefully read the instructions, and followed each step with a strange sense of solemnity. When he sealed the envelope and dropped it in the mail, he still thought of it as nothing more than a personal science experiment with no particular expectations. 2 weeks later, an email arrived confirming the sample had been received and was being processed. During the wait, Michael felt the same nervous anticipation he'd experienced years earlier when he first opened his mother's locked drawer. He told no one what he was doing. Every now and then he glanced at the Sammy 1963 photo and wondered if that child were still alive. He'd be as old as Michael was now. In mid-March, he received notice that the DNA matching results were ready. When he logged in, the screen showed a long list of partial matches, mostly very distant relatives. But on the third line, he froze. Match 99.2%. Russell family, Tennessee. His eyes locked onto the words. Next to it was the note. He probability of close blood relationship. Grandparent-grandchild level. He read it over and over, trying to grasp what it meant. The database only provided a representative name. Eleanor Russell, Nashville, Tennessee. The name meant nothing to him, but the location sent a chill down his spine. Tennessee, the state his mother had said she was born in and lost everything. Michael opened the account details again, looking for contact information, but the system only showed that the Russell family DNA sample had been submitted through a partnership with the Tennessee State Forensic Agency. That meant this wasn't just an individual's data, it came from a law enforcement archive of criminal and missing persons cases. For the first time in his life, Michael's hand shook as he moved the mouse over the line that read, "Contact for law enforcement inquiries." He read the instructions carefully, then downloaded and printed the full report, slipping it into a folder along with the old photograph. 3 days later, he received a call from Family Tree DNA's support team confirming that his results showed a significant match with a missing person profile submitted by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The representative asked if he consented to having his information forwarded to the agency handling the case. Michael was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Yes." After hanging up, he sat motionless, staring at the printed results in his hand. The simple characters felt heavy, like evidence of something enormous waiting to be uncovered. The report's scientific summary read, "Genetic profile of sample hash MTRN015 shows high similarity to the Russell family lineage residing in Tennessee. Probability of first or second degree blood relationship." He didn't understand all the terminology, but the numbers and the state name said enough. He opened a map of the United States and traced the distance from Ohio to Tennessee, just over 400 miles, not far for a secret that might have lasted half a century. In the days that followed, Michael did nothing but reread every document his mother had left behind. He turned unsent letters over and over, searching for any Tennessee address, finding only fragments: Holmes Avenue, Knox. Those scraps now seemed to connect, though he still didn't know how. A week later, when the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation received the automated report from Family Tree DNA, Michael Turner's profile was flagged potential match missing child case, 1963. The notice was routed to the cold case unit, where the assigned investigator began reviewing the new DNA matches. Back in Dayton, Michael folded the printed results, placed them in an envelope, sealed it, and set it on the desk beside the framed photo, Sammy, 1963. He looked at the child's face and felt as if he were staring at himself at an age he couldn't remember. The words Russell family, Tennessee echoed in his mind like an unanswered question. He had no idea where sending that DNA sample would lead, only that every road to answers had finally begun the moment that envelope was delivered to an agency hundreds of miles away. In the cold case unit of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, on an early April morning in 2015, lead investigator Alice Whitman was reviewing the monthly list of automated DNA reports forwarded from Family Tree DNA. Dozens arrived each month related to missing or unidentified persons. Most were random, low-probability matches that never justified reopening a file. She carefully scanned each line, noting codes with high similarity percentages. When she reached the entry, "Potential match, Missing child case, 1963. Russell, Samuel. She stopped. The name made her heart pound, not just because it was one of the oldest unsolved cases in the state, but because she knew every detail of it. In the archived paper file sat the notation, Russell, Samuel, case, #221, signed by her own grandfather, Harold Whitman, who had spent half his life chasing that disappearance. Alice immediately opened the supplemental database and pulled up the new flagged profile, sample #MTRN015, registered to Michael Turner, Dayton, Ohio. The statistic showed a first or second-degree blood relationship with the Russell family DNA sample preserved from the 1990s when TBI began collecting relatives' DNA in missing person cases. She read the analysis again and again, hardly believing it. The Russell family of Knoxville, Tennessee, linked to a man born in 1958 in Ohio with no birth certificate. She remembered photocopied notes from her grandfather's old notebook that she still kept. If technology ever becomes powerful enough to mend what was broken, look for the name Russell. Now the screen in front of her seemed to reflect those very words. Alice printed the full report, set it on her desk, then pulled from her drawer the paper copy of case #221 she kept separately. Inside were the original missing person report, black and white photos, her grandfather's typed statements, and the handwritten note, possible abduction. She laid the two folders side by side and scanned the timelines. 1963, the disappearance. 2015, the DNA match. 52 years, a circle closing. Without waiting for the end of the day, Alice drafted an email to the cold case director requesting reactivation of the Russell case based on the new evidence. She detailed the test results, the match percentage, and the high likelihood that Michael Turner was a direct blood relative of the Russell family. She asked for cross-verification with federal population and residency databases and permission to retrieve all original physical evidence for modern DNA comparison. After sending the email, she leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at the light rain. In years of working cold cases, she had read thousands of missing person files, but none had ever felt this personal and this grave. That afternoon, she was called to an emergency meeting of the cold case team. Supervisors and forensic representatives examined the documents. A DNA specialist confirmed that a 99.2% match almost certainly meant shared blood. The unit director looked at Alice and asked if she was sure she wanted to take responsibility for reopening something this old. It would mean pulling 50-year-old evidence out of storage. Alice nodded and said she was ready. The formal reactivation request was drafted that same day, titled Reactivation Request. Cold case #221 Samuel Russell, missing child 1963. In the justification section, Alice wrote, "New DNA results establish a blood relationship between an adult in Ohio and the Russell victim family in Tennessee. This data may provide an authentic breakthrough in Knox County's longest pending case." The file went up the chain and was approved within 2 days. When the red "Approved for Investigation" stamp appeared in the corner, Alice felt another circle close. She printed an extra copy and placed it beside the old framed photo of her grandfather on her desk. Afternoon light streamed through the window and glinted off the words, "Cold case #221, reopened." In that moment she knew she had just picked up the thread Harold Whitman had held for a lifetime. A case thought buried in dust was about to be opened again, and this time she would walk the path he never finished. Immediately after reactivation approval for cold case #221, Alice Whitman began by retrieving the original evidence. She contacted the TBI evidence repository in Nashville, where thousands of items from unsolved state cases were stored. That morning she and a technician went to the main warehouse, a cold concrete building where dim fluorescent lights shone on steel shelves reaching the ceiling, each holding dozens of old cardboard boxes. The Russell file was cataloged as 63KN221, stored in Section A3, Row 12. As the warehouse worker climbed the metal ladder to pull it down, Alice stood silently, feeling as though she were touching a piece of history that had slept for more than half a century. The box was thick with dust, its label nearly faded. Wearing gloves, She lifted the lid and saw a jumble of sealed envelopes, black and white photos, typewritten reports, and a few small items wrapped in cloth. She checked each piece against the inventory her grandfather had created. Item E0463 was listed as gas receipt signed Mary Turner. The thin sheet was sealed in clear plastic, its edges yellowed. Alice carefully removed it, held it under the light, and clearly saw the slanted handwriting with the elongated T, exactly as described in the original report. Below the signature was the round ink stamp of an old gas station at the 11W intersection. She read it again and again, struck by the strange reality of a name she had only known from files now existing in real ink. This receipt was the only piece of physical evidence directly linking the suspect recorded in 1963. She immediately photographed it in high resolution and sent a request for handwriting analysis to the forensic lab. At the same time, she began searching regional records for any documents containing the signature or handwriting of anyone named Mary Turner. Thanks to modern electronic databases, the search was far easier than in her grandfather's day. A few days later, the system returned a hit. A woman named Mary L. Turner had a medical file at St. Luke Hospital in Dayton, Ohio, admitted in 1999 for heart problems. The file included her signature on a surgical consent form. Alice promptly requested comparison of the two samples, the 1963 gas receipt and the 1999 medical form. 3 days later, the forensic comparison report landed on her desk. The results table read, 80% similarity in form and slant. High probability same writer. A small note added, additional reference samples needed for 100% confirmation. Alice stared at the line for a long time, a chill running down her spine. The Mary Turner in Ohio, the same woman linked through Michael Turner's DNA, had a strong chance of being the very person who appeared in the 1963 Russell file. She placed the receipt next to a copy of the hospital signature. The strokes were nearly identical, soft curved M, elongated F, consistent spacing, details only a lifelong writer would retain. She felt a bridge forming between eras faded blue ink from the past and modern medical records beginning to fit together like puzzle pieces. After finishing the review, Alice updated the evidence log. E0463 signature verified consistent with Mary L. Turner, Ohio. 80% match. She resealed everything in a new moisture-proof box, labeled it, reevaluated 2015, and signed it. That afternoon she submitted the report to her superiors with a request to continue verifying Mary Turner's identity and all her connections between 1960 and 1970. As she left the warehouse, sunlight poured through the long corridor, dust floating in the beams. Alice paused for a second before the steel door, feeling she had just unlocked the first in a chain of mysteries her grandfather had searched for half his life. The Russell case was officially moving again after 52 years of silence, starting with a tattered gas receipt and a signature time had not managed to erase. Building on the high-probability handwriting match, Alice Whitman now focused on Mary Turner's background, trying to reconstruct the woman's entire life before she surfaced in Ohio. She contacted Tennessee's Civil Records Office to pull employment and residency files for anyone named Turner in the 1960s. Among hundreds of microfilm records, she found Mary L. Turner, born 1929, occupation domestic helper, with a temporary address in Knoxville, Knox County. The form was dated February 1962, 1 year before Samuel Russell vanished. The occupation matched a vague note in the original Russell file. Former domestic helper, left 3 weeks before the incident. Alice dug back into the old file. In Harold Whitman's pencil notes she read, Eleanor Russell employed a housekeeper for 6 months. Female approx. 30 years old, quit suddenly. No clear reason. She read it several times, chills running through her at the impossible coincidence. Continuing through state medical records, Alice located a 1962 Knoxville hospital entry for patient Mary Turner admitted for complications after a stillbirth female fetus, 7 months. The final line read, unstable psychological condition, follow-up recommended. She paused a long time, realizing this woman had lost a child the year before Samuel disappeared. A possible motive began to form, though she wasn't ready to voice it yet. Later residency records showed Mary Turner's address changing frequently from North Knoxville to the western suburbs, only miles from the Russell home. In February 1963, she re-registered for work as a domestic worker, and the employment roster listed her employer as Russell, John, and Eleanor. Alice folded the copies, a mix of astonishment and heaviness filling her. Mary Turner, the former housekeeper for the victim family, now appeared unmistakably in official records. She pinpointed the termination date. Payroll records showed Mary removed from the Russell household salary list on February 20, 1963. Exactly 3 weeks before Samuel vanished, reason for termination was listed briefly: personal health. When Alice contacted the old labor office, staff confirmed the record was valid with no complaints from either party. However, the final handwritten note read, "Employee did not collect final week's pay," meaning Mary had left abruptly, without notice, and disappeared from Knoxville immediately afterward. Checking intrastate vehicle records, Alice found a registration for a cream-colored Ford pickup, Knox County plates, issued in March 1963, to Mary L. Turner, with an ID number matching the 1962 medical file. It was the exact type of vehicle witnesses had described in her grandfather's original report. She added a note to her summary: vehicle identified, consistent with case description. The facts were linking: a woman who lost a newborn, worked for the Russells, quit suddenly weeks before the disappearance, and left Knoxville at the same time the child vanished. Cross-referencing with Ohio residency records showed a permit issued at the end of 1963 to Mary L. Turner in Dayton, address and signature identical. Alice now knew that, with this evidence alone, she could state Mary Turner left Knoxville at the exact time of the incident and had suitable means of transportation. That afternoon, she wrote a nearly 20-page internal report, attaching all employment, medical, and vehicle records, and noted, recommend verification of travel route between Knoxville, Tennessee and Dayton, OE in March 1963. High probability subject fled the state immediately after the disappearance. Before leaving the office, she opened the old black and white photo, the only surviving picture of young Samuel Russell, taken in front of the house. Under the desk lamp, the boy smiled innocently, holding a small tin car. She placed the photo beside copies of Mary Turner's documents and saw the 50-year gap slowly filling with faded handwriting. At the center of it all stood a woman who had once walked into that house as an ordinary housekeeper and walked out carrying the town of Knoxville's greatest secret. Having completed Mary Turner's background report and established matching timelines, locations, and direct ties to the Russell family, Alice Whitman knew the next step was biological confirmation to definitively prove the relationship between Michael Turner in Dayton and the child missing since 1963. She sent formal paperwork to Family Tree DNA requesting direct contact with the owner of sample hash MTRN015 under the Law Enforcement Partnership Program. 3 days later, she received approval along with Michael Turner's phone number and email address, Roosevelt Drive, Dayton, Ohio. Alice sent a brief email introducing herself, explaining she worked on a federal missing person identification program and needed to verify a high DNA match related to his sample. That same evening, as she left the office, her phone rang. A low, cautious male voice confirmed he had submitted a kit months earlier and asked if there was a problem. Alice assured him there wasn't, just that his results showed a very strong match with a long-term missing person case in Tennessee. She asked if he would be willing to provide an additional independent sample for modern retesting. After a few seconds of silence, Michael agreed. They scheduled a meeting the following week at Dayton Police Headquarters. When they met, Alice saw a middle-aged man whose eyes held both confusion and wariness. She explained the sampling process, had him sign consent forms, and took 2 blood samples and 1 cheek swab. While waiting for the paperwork, she asked if he knew anything about a Mary Turner who once lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. Michael replied that she was his mother, but he knew almost nothing about her life before Ohio. only that she had said she was born in Tennessee. Alice quickly jotted, "Geographic connection confirmed." After the appointment, she returned to Nashville, delivered the samples to the forensic lab, and requested comparison with the original Russell family DNA, including the sample from Mother Eleanor Russell banked in 1994. Analysis took nearly 2 weeks. During that time, Alice barely left the office. She reread every old file, compared every detail, and tried to picture the events of 1963. On the 13th night, the sealed results envelope arrived on her desk. She opened it and read the bold first line, "Sample hash MTRN015 exhibits 99.98% genetic similarity with sample hash RSL 1963. The final conclusion read, "Results confirm direct first-degree blood relationship. Probability of identical biological individual." Alice set the paper down, her hands trembling slightly. 52 years of investigation, dozens of reports, countless theories, and now, with a few drops of blood, everything was settled. She called the unit director to report that DNA had confirmed an absolute match between Michael Turner and the child missing since 1963. An emergency meeting was convened that afternoon. In the conference room, investigators and forensic experts viewed the report projected on screen, long columns of colored genetic markers, lining up perfectly. One specialist said quietly, "There is no other possible coincidence. It's the same person." Alice presented the entire investigation, from discovering the gas receipt, tracing Mary Turner's employment records, to collecting and analyzing the new samples. When she finished, the room was silent. The TBI director nodded and declared the Russell case officially identified as a surviving victim. He instructed Alice to draft the formal report and propose a disclosure plan. That night, she returned to her desk, looked at the thick folder bearing her grandfather's old case number beside the freshly printed results, and felt an indescribable surge of emotion. After half a century, every faded trace Harold Whitman had chased was now illuminated by the language of science. She opened her computer and typed the first lines of the final report. DNA comparison between adult sample from Dayton, Ohio, and missing person profile, Russell Samuel, Tennessee 1963, 99.98% match. Confirmed identical individual. She paused, looked at the words on the screen, then added one last sentence, "Cold case hash 221, biological identification successful." When she saved the file, she knew a case once thought lost forever to time now had a new resolution. One that began with a man who had no birth certificate and ended with DNA evidence, linking 2 generations, closing half a century of uncertainty and doubt. Immediately after the DNA results confirmed that Michael Turner was indeed Samuel Russell, Alice Whitman proceeded to the physical evidence cross-verification phase to complete the identification file. She knew that biological verification was the foundation, but to close a case that had remained unsolved for more than half a century, every related physical detail also had to be re-examined one final time. At the TBI Evidence Archives in Nashville, she requested the unsealing of 3 key items recorded in the original file: the child's shoe labeled E0163, the crime scene photographs, and the gas receipt E0463. The entire process was conducted in the presence of 2 forensic technicians and 1 representative from the validation department. When the evidence box was opened, the smell of old paper mixed with plastic and iron dust rose up. The small shoe lay quietly inside its sealed bag, light brown leather, the strap broken, the sole coated with a layer of dried mud that had turned to powder. Alice examined it closely and noticed that the embroidered bird pattern on the side was still intact, the stitching only slightly frayed. She had detailed photos taken, then placed it next to the only surviving black and white photograph of Samuel taken in 1963. In the picture, the little boy was sitting on the porch steps, and at his right foot was clearly visible a pair of shoes with the identical embroidered design. When the photo region was enlarged, the technician compared every stitch, the position of the bird's wings, the number of stitches, Everything matched to the millimeter. Preliminary conclusion: the shoe in evidence was one of the pairs Samuel was wearing in the 1963 photograph. For further confirmation, Alice ordered modern spectroscopic analysis of the leather and thread. The report returned 2 days later showed that the fiber composition and adhesive were consistent with children's shoes manufactured by the J. Thompson Shoes factory in Knoxville in the early 1960s, a rare line sold only regionally. The purchase record was still on file at Russell & Sons, the store where Eleanor Russell had stated she bought the shoes for her son. Every tiny detail linked together into a perfect logical chain. After completing the physical inspection, Alice opened the envelope containing the Mary Turner gas receipt. Under the examination room lights, the faded blue ink was still clearly legible. The handwriting expert once again compared it with Mary Turner's hospital records from Ohio and issued a supplemental conclusion: 85% match level, very high probability of being written by the same person. The report was signed and added to the main file. Finally, she ordered a full secondary DNA screening of all items in the hope that biological traces remained. The dried mud in the shoe sole was processed using modern extraction techniques, and remarkably, the analysts found traces of protein and keratin sufficient to determine the wearer's sex, male, consistent with data on Samuel Russell. Although there was not enough material for a full genetic profile, this result further strengthened the physical evidence supporting the identity conclusion. In the consolidated report, Alice wrote, "Shoe E0163, recovered from the bank of the Tennessee River, matches perfectly in shape, pattern, and material with the victim's shoes in the 1963 photograph. Biological traces confirm the wearer was male and of appropriate age. Gas receipt E0463 proves the presence of suspect Mary Turner in the area at the time of the incident. Sufficient physical evidence supports the DNA results, confirming the surviving victim's identity." When she signed the report, Alice felt her hands tremble slightly. On the table, the silent artifacts of the past seemed to tell the story that the words in the files had never fully captured. She photographed every item for digital archiving, then carefully resealed each one in a new box labeled Verified 2015. Physical evidence confirmed. That afternoon, she took the completed file to the TBI director. A brief meeting was held behind closed doors, where department heads signed off that all evidence, DNA, handwriting, and original physical items, was consistent and legally sufficient to close the case. When the red stamp "Identity Confirmed" was placed on the final page, Alice knew she had reached the end of a journey that had lasted more than half a century. Every physical trace, no matter how small, now fit together into a complete, authentic picture, proving that the child who disappeared in 1963, Samuel Russell, was the man known as Michael Turner. On the morning of May 18, 2015, at TBI headquarters in Nashville, an unscheduled press conference was held, drawing dozens of reporters from across the state. The large conference room had been carefully prepared. Behind the podium stood the TBI seal and the words Case #221, Russell Investigation. Alice Whitman, representing the Cold Case Unit, stood beside the bureau director in front of a nearly 200-page report and enlarged photographs of the evidence. At exactly 9 a.m., the conference began. The director opened in a grave voice, introducing this as one of Tennessee's longest-running cases, originating in the summer of 1963 and spanning more than half a century. He stated that thanks to advances in DNA technology and the tireless efforts of generations of investigators, the TBI could confirm that the disappearance of 5-year-old Samuel Russell had been fully resolved. The room fell silent as the screen displayed two photographs on the left: the black and white image of Samuel in 1963. On the right, a current photo of Michael Turner, the man from Dayton, Ohio, proven by DNA to be that missing child. Camera shutters clicked loudly as reporters scribbled notes. The director continued, Independent DNA testing shows a 99.98% probability match between Mr. Michael Turner's sample and the Russell family biological profiles stored in the database. Original evidence, including the child's shoe, crime scene photos, and gas receipt, has been analyzed and confirmed to match perfectly. Based on the physical and biological evidence, the TBI officially declares Russell file, case #221, classified solved. Victim recovered. A wave of applause mixed with murmurs filled the room. Alice looked around, sensing the atmosphere thick with emotion and astonishment. The press was accustomed to failed or stalled cases. Rarely did they witness a disappearance of more than 50 years end with the victim alive. When it was her turn to present the technical details, Alice stepped to the podium and opened the slide deck. She summarized the investigation process, retrieving the evidence, analyzing the gas receipt, identifying Mary Turner, and connecting Michael Turner's DNA sample. Her voice remained calm but carried emotion, especially when she mentioned the matching signature of Mary Turner, the former housekeeper for the Russell family, who left Knoxville at the exact time of the incident. She concluded with a short sentence, "Every last piece has been found, and because of that, a child has returned to his real name." When the conference ended, newspapers and television stations ran the story the same day, calling it the miracle of DNA and Tennessee's longest-running case solved. The TBI simultaneously released an official statement on its website that read, "Thanks to advances in genetic testing technology and coordination between the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and Family Tree DNA, the identity of Samuel Russell, missing since 1963, has been confirmed. Case status updated, solved, victim recovered." The statement was sent to the U.S. Department of Justice and a copy forwarded to the Knox County Sheriff's Office, where Harold Whitman once worked. In the appendix, Alice carefully added one small line, "This is the first case in Knox County history to be closed after more than 50 years, with the victim still alive." After the news broke, the TBI office phones rang non-stop. Dozens of reporters called requesting interviews, but Alice declined all personal appearances, sending only a brief message, "The credit belongs to those who came before us." She spent the afternoon contacting the civil registry to locate any remaining Russell relatives. After several calls, they confirmed that a distant relative of Eleanor Russell still lived in the Chattanooga suburbs, the person who had kept the family profile active in the DNA database since 1994. When Alice delivered the news, the woman on the other end burst into tears, saying she never thought that file would ever match anyone. "I can't believe the little boy is still alive," she said, voice trembling. "Eleanor can finally rest in peace." The story quickly spread across national media. Major networks like CNN and ABC covered it in their evening news, calling it a reunion miracle after more than half a century. The TBI received hundreds of congratulatory messages from ordinary citizens to retired investigators who had worked with Harold Whitman decades earlier. In her office, Alice opened the original file once more, placed the new report on top, the red word "solved," victim recovered, standing out like a perfect ending. Late that afternoon, she stepped out of the building into a Nashville sky, glowing with sunset. A gentle breeze moved the flags, and she thought of her grandfather, the man who used to sit up at night, writing in his journal about this case, believing that one day the truth would be found. Now what he believed had come true. In the final summary sent to the State Department of Justice, Alice wrote the closing line, "After 52 years, the Russell file is officially closed. The victim has been identified, survived, and found. Justice sometimes arrives not through a verdict, but through a return." In early June 2015, almost 3 weeks after the TBI press conference, Michael Turner drove from Dayton to Chattanooga at the investigation agency's invitation to meet the only surviving relative of the Russell family, Ruth Miller, the older half-sister, same mother, different father of the boy Samuel. During the drive he barely spoke, just stared through the windshield, trying to imagine the face of the woman he was about to meet. His childhood memories were completely blank. He remembered nothing of Knoxville, the old house, or his birth parents. But ever since receiving the DNA confirmation of his true identity, a mixture of fear and compulsion had gripped him, as if his soul were being called back to where it once belonged. When the car stopped in front of the Hamilton County Administrative Center where the TBI had arranged the meeting, Alice Whitman was already waiting with the forensic team and a civil affairs attorney. In the small conference room, white light from the window fell across the table where two envelopes lay neatly, one containing the final direct DNA comparison results, the other the legal identity restoration file. Ruth Miller entered, small frame, silver hair, hands trembling as she clutched an old photograph. She was nearly 60, but her eyes were still bright and deep. When she saw the man sitting across from her, she froze, lips moving soundlessly. Michael stood, awkwardly bowing his head in greeting. Alice introduced them briefly. "Mr. Turner, this is Mrs. Ruth Miller, your half-sister through your mother. We have confirmed the blood relationship by DNA, and today we will complete the final verification step before sending the file to state court for legal identity restoration." In that moment, the room was so quiet the air conditioning could be heard. Ruth walked slowly forward, eyes welling up as she studied the man's face. "Sammy," she whispered, voice breaking. Michael froze. That name made his heart contract, like an echo from very far away. He had no memory of it, yet tears came unbidden. Ruth stepped closer, took his hands and whispered, "You have mother's eyes." They stood like that for a long time, only the click of the TBI photographer's camera capturing the moment. An image the entire state of Tennessee would call the moment half a century closed. After the reunion, the forensic team took a buccal swab from Ruth for direct comparison with Michael. The procedure took place in the next room and lasted only minutes, but for Alice, it was the very last step to eliminate any remaining doubt. 3 days later, the results arrived in Nashville, 99.99% match, proving Ruth and Michael were half-siblings through their mother, Eleanor Russell. The report was forwarded to state court, along with the complete TBI file. On June 22, 2015, in a special session of Knox County Court, the judge read the order restoring the legal identity of Mr. Michael Turner, recognizing his original birth name as Samuel Joseph Russell, born August 5, 1958, in Knoxville, Tennessee. The order simultaneously canceled the missing person status in civil records and issued a new birth certificate, new Social Security number, and full legal citizenship rights. At a simple ceremony at TBI headquarters, Alice personally handed him the freshly printed copy of his new birth certificate, the name Samuel Joseph Russell, prominent beneath the red state's red seal. Michael took the paper, fingers trembling as they touched his name, a name he had never known was his. He said softly, voice thick, "I've lived my whole life with a name that had no past. Now I know where I come from." Ruth sat beside him, holding his hand tightly, tears falling nonstop. She told him that throughout her childhood, she remembered her little brother playing on the porch steps, then one summer day he was gone. Their mother, Eleanor, lived the rest of her life in silence and died never knowing what happened. "Mom kept your picture under her pillow every night," she said. "She never believed you were dead." Hearing that, Michael lowered his head, shoulders shaking slightly. He had no memory of that woman, yet a vague sorrow rose in him, as if maternal love had never truly been severed. Alice quietly took notes, knowing this was not only the closing of a case, but the rebirth of a person erased from history. That afternoon, after all formalities were complete, they walked out of the building into bright Tennessee summer sunlight. Ruth turned to him with the first smile she had worn in years. "Welcome home, Sammy." He smiled back, eyes blurred with tears, and answered, "Thank you, sis, thank you for waiting." In that moment, the man who once had no birth certificate, no memories, and no idea who he was, had been called by his old name again, standing in the homeland where everything had begun. That same evening, the TBI issued an official update to the electronic file, case #221, solved. Victim Samuel Joseph Russell. Status: recovered and legally identified. A copy was sent to Central Archives with a special note. Longest-running missing person case in Tennessee history, successfully verified and identity restored. In her office, Alice sat alone, gazing out at the lights of Nashville, her heart full. She knew that justice does not always come through a courtroom or criminal sentence. Sometimes it is simply the moment a person recovers his true name and a family recovers someone they lost for more than half a century. After completing the legal restoration of Samuel Joseph Russell's identity, the TBI moved to the final phase of the investigation, determining the true motive behind Mary Turner's kidnapping. Although she had died in 2001 and could not be prosecuted, the agency still needed to build an official psychological profile to close the case comprehensively. Alice Whitman was tasked with coordinating with the criminal behavior and psychology team from Vanderbilt University, experts who had previously profiled numerous non-ransom child abductions. In a Nashville conference room, they spread out the thick file containing every piece of collected data: Mary Turner's 1962 miscarriage medical records, her employment file with the Russell family, resignation date, travel records after leaving Knoxville, and her subsequent life in Dayton under a new identity. Each piece of information was linked to construct the woman's psychological portrait. The expert's initial report noted that Mary Turner had a history of severe psychological trauma, especially after losing her 7-month-old baby the year before the crime. Knoxville hospital records from the time clearly stated, patient exhibits insomnia, mild paranoia, obsession with motherhood, requires long-term monitoring. Yet only months later she was discharged and hired by the Russell family, coinciding with Eleanor's pregnancy and Samuel's birth. The experts identified this as the first trigger for distorted attachment. During her months as housekeeper, Mary frequently cared for Samuel, and old neighbor statements recalled seeing her walking the boy around the block multiple times without adult supervision. From a psychological perspective, the experts concluded that Mary came to see the child as a replacement for her lost baby, a transference bond in which the traumatized person recreates maternal feelings by fixating on another's child. When Eleanor fired her in February 1963, just 3 weeks before the disappearance, Mary may have felt robbed a second time. Based on medical records, she had no prior criminal history or violent behavior, and there was no evidence she ever harmed anyone else. The team concluded the abduction was not motivated by money or revenge, but by post-traumatic grief disorder, specifically the rare grief replacement syndrome, in which the sufferer attempts to restore the maternal role by taking another child. Supporting evidence was found in Mary's later life. Dayton residency records showed she lived quietly, worked as a private nurse, raised Michael as her own son, and never showed signs of abuse or violence. Every neighbor in the area where Michael grew up described her as a gentle but private mother who feared strangers. Even Michael, in his statement to the TBI, said she never raised her voice or struck him, only constantly worried someone would take him away. One of the psychologists commented, "In Mary's mind, the kidnapping was not a crime but redemption. She did not flee out of guilt. She fled out of fear of losing her child again." Reading the report, Alice felt a strange compassion. Though Mary Turner's act was criminal, at its deepest psychological level, it did not stem from malice, but from brokenness. She remembered the unsent letter Michael had found in his mother's drawer, the half-written line, "I only wanted," which now made sense. The full story emerged: a woman who lost her baby, cared for another, and in a moment of desperation, took the boy and lived a fabricated life for more than 40 years. The experts' final conclusion: no evidence Mary Turner caused physical harm to Samuel Russell. The kidnapping was emotionally motivated, non-violent. She raised and cared for the subject as her own child and kept his true identity secret until her death. In the summary sent to the State Department of Justice, Alice wrote, "Motive determined, replacement of lost child. Act, non-profit abduction, no abuse, element. Victim status, survived, developed normally." As she typed the last lines, she felt no anger or outrage, only the gentle sadness of a story in which every party was a victim of time and loss. The TBI closed the psychological file with the finding, Mary L. Turner, criminal act confirmed, non-violent motive, concluded with lifelong care. No posthumous prosecution. The Russell case, after 52 years, finally had a complete answer, not through a trial or sentence, but through understanding the reason behind the act that once plunged the entire state of Tennessee into tragedy. After completing the psychological profile to determine Mary Turner's motive, the TBI moved on to the next phase, screening for the possible existence of an accomplice to ensure no link in the chain had been overlooked. In Harold Whitman's 1963 notes, the name Frank Dyer had once been listed as a potential suspect, but was later eliminated due to lack of evidence. At the time, Dyer was a Korean War veteran living in northern suburban Knoxville, less than 5 miles from the Russell home. He was described as a quiet man, formerly a mechanic, with loose acquaintances among several families who employed domestic help, including Mary Turner. When reviewing the file, Alice noticed that this description had never been thoroughly investigated. She requested that Frank Dyer's personal records be pulled again through military databases and old tax files. The records showed that Dyer had registered ownership of a small garage specializing in truck repairs from 1961 to 1964, but the business closed immediately after the summer Samuel disappeared. Notably, in the Knox County archived notary records, the team located a bill of sale for a 1955 cream-colored Ford pickup truck, matching the description of the suspect vehicle in the original case file. The contract was dated March 4, 1963. The seller signed as Frank Dyer, the buyer as Mary L. Turner. Both signatures appeared on the same notarized document authenticated by the local notary office. Alice read the copy of the contract and felt her heart race. This could be the first piece of evidence confirming a direct connection between Dyer and Mary Turner just days before the disappearance. She sent the document to the handwriting analysis lab and requested a comparison of Dyer's signature on the contract with his surviving military documents. The report returned 3 days later. Signatures match 100%, no doubt. This proved Dyer was indeed present and transacted with Mary Turner only days before Samuel vanished. The TBI immediately opened a supplemental file and re-investigated the vehicle's provenance. According to archived records, the vehicle was never re-registered in Tennessee after 1963. The next record appeared in Ohio in October of that year, with new plates under the name Mary Turner. This strengthened the hypothesis that the truck Dyer sold was the very vehicle Mary used to leave Knoxville with the child. Alice pulled additional residency records for Dyer from 1963, 1965, and discovered he left Knoxville at the end of 1963, moved to Arkansas, and then dropped off the grid. The TBI contacted local police in the areas where he had lived, but Dyer had died in 1987. The death certificate confirmed he passed away from lung disease with no known relatives. When re-interviewing old witnesses, one neighbor who had lived near Dyer vaguely recalled that he often repaired vehicles for a brown-haired woman named Mary, who occasionally stopped by the garage in the afternoons. The statement was not specific, but it aligned with the case timeline. From this, Alice formed a working theory: Mary Turner may have met Dyer while having her vehicle serviced, purchased his truck, and Dyer, either unwittingly or deliberately, helped her leave Knoxville. However, no document or statement proved he knew about the kidnapping. When the team examined financial records, they found no unusual money flows or evidence of long-term collaboration between the two. The truck sale was a legal cash transaction. TBI legal experts concluded that although a connection existed, there was no evidence Dyer participated in or had prior knowledge of Mary's plan. The summary report stated clearly, the possibility that Frank Dyer provided technical or unwitting indirect assistance exists, but there are insufficient elements to constitute accomplice liability. No evidence of material benefit or conspiracy. Alice read the conclusion and sighed. She knew that if Harold Whitman were still alive, he would have wanted to hear that Dyer was not primarily responsible, that every last trail led back to Mary Turner alone. In the final note of the report she wrote, Frank Dyer confirmed contact with primary suspect via vehicle sale contract, but insufficient basis for prosecution. No indication of active complicity. Case has no identified accomplice. As she sealed the file, Alice felt the full picture was clearer than ever. Mary Turner had acted alone, driven by the pain of losing her own child, and the coincidental availability of a means to leave Knoxville. Every other lead, however faint, had now been closed. That afternoon she closed the supplemental folder, labeled it Investigation Complete. No accomplice found, signed it, and archived it with the complete Russell file. A case that had stretched more than half a century was finally and fully closed, with no one left standing in the shadows waiting to be named. The success of the Russell case became a major turning point in cold case investigations in Tennessee. And just 2 months after the file was officially closed, the TBI launched a new initiative called the Legacy DNA Project. The program's goal was to review, digitize, and cross-reference every remaining biological sample from missing persons cases dating from the 1950s through the 1980s, while encouraging relatives of victims to submit DNA samples to expand identification possibilities. Alice Whitman, who had led the Russell investigation, was appointed technical coordinator for the project. At the first meeting at TBI headquarters in Nashville, she presented a report showing that the Russell case had only been solved through comparison with data from family tree DNA, something that had never before been systematically applied at the state level. Building on that experience, the TBI signed formal collaboration agreements with 3 civilian organizations specializing in missing persons identification, establishing a nationwide DNA data linkage network. In the first 6 months, the project collected more than 300 DNA samples from relatives of long-term missing persons in Knox, Shelby, Hamilton, and Davidson counties. Each sample was stored in a central database in Nashville, encoded to FBI CODIS standards for synchronization with the national system. Alice personally oversaw data entry to ensure none of the errors that had occurred in the 1960s were repeated. Every week, she and the technical team reviewed potential matches flagged by the automated system. Most were only distant randomable random matches, but occasionally a truly promising result appeared. In December 2015, Alice's team recorded the program's first match. A DNA sample from a woman named Helen Parker in Memphis matched 99.7% with an unidentified female victim discovered in rural Franklin in 1974. That woman had disappeared at age 22, and for more than 40 years, her family had kept only one photograph taken on her graduation day. When the results were confirmed, the TBI arranged a meeting between the family and local authorities. The press called it the second miracle after the Russell case. 2 weeks later, another result moved the entire team. A DNA sample from a man in North Carolina matched remains found in Chattanooga in 1968. Previously stored as John Doe 68kh. Using new gene sequencing technology, they identified him as Jacob Hines, a railroad worker who had gone missing during a storm. The 2 consecutive cases brought fresh hope to hundreds of families who had lost loved ones. The Legacy DNA Project quickly expanded, receiving additional funding from the Tennessee Department of Justice and the FBI. Local agencies across Tennessee began sending old evidence to the Nashville lab for reanalysis with modern techniques. By mid-2016, more than 2,500 physical items, from hair clippings, teeth, and bones, to fabric fragments containing biological traces, had been rescanned and encoded. The new system allowed automated searches across the entire national database in just hours instead of months. Alice oversaw every stage, from sample collection to storage, ensuring transparency and double verification. In her report to the TBI director, she wrote, "The success of the Russell case proves that no investigation is truly over as long as biological evidence remains. Time only delays, it does not erase the traces of truth." The report was forwarded to the State Judicial Committee and praised as a model for cold case programs nationwide. In June 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice officially announced the expansion of the Legacy DNA project into a federal network, with Tennessee as the pioneering state. The announcement ceremony took place in Nashville, attended by FBI representatives, the Department of Health, and victims' families. On the podium, the TBI director cited the Russell case as a symbol of hope, and Alice was introduced as the person who had turned one generation's obsession into a scientific tool for the next. As the audience rose in applause, she simply bowed her head, thinking of her grandfather Harold Whitman and the dusty old files he had kept his entire life. That legacy had now become the foundation for a search network that reached beyond Tennessee's borders. By the end of 2016, the system had flagged 2 more potential matches awaiting verification. Alice sat in her office, looking at the large board displaying hundreds of case numbers, knowing each line represented an unfinished story. In her work journal she wrote, "Legacy DNA Project, over 300 samples received, 2 identities confirmed, hundreds of families still waiting." The Russell story was only the beginning. As she set down her pen, the late afternoon light streamed through the window and fell on an old black and white photograph. The picture of Samuel Russell smiling on the front porch in 1963, the emblem of the journey Tennessee had just begun to continue through the language of science and memory. As the Legacy DNA project entered its second year, the TBI realized that its achievements would not be sustainable if evidence storage and forensic data systems remained based on the old model. Many cases from the 1960s and 1970s had failed simply because samples degraded, seals were broken, or items were stored improperly, the Russell case being a prime example. Now that very case became the foundation for redesigning the entire modern electronic storage process. Alice Whitman, with her hands-on experience recovering old records and evidence, was appointed chief advisor to the Forensic Archiving Reform Program, a sub-project of Legacy DNA. She and the technical team began building a 2-tiered digitized storage system. The first tier held DNA data and biological traces encoded to CODIS standards. The second tier stored all administrative files, photographs, and 3D scanned physical evidence using microstructure imaging technology. Every item entering storage received its own QR code directly linked to its electronic record, allowing investigators to access all information with a single scan. For testing, the TBI chose the Russell case as the prototype file. Every piece of evidence in the case, including the child's shoes, crime scene photos, gas receipts, and DNA analysis reports, was 3D scanned, photographed in ultra-high resolution, and uploaded to the central storage system. Data was backed up on 2 independent servers in Nashville and Memphis to prevent loss. Alice supervised every phase, from recataloging evidence to biosafe labeling procedures. She mandated that all future cold cases follow the triple witness principle, meaning every document, sample, and technical record had to be verified by 3 separate levels of review before final sealing. In her technical report to the State Department of Justice, she wrote, "The Russell case is the clearest example that information only retains value when properly preserved. A speck of soil, or a seemingly meaningless receipt, can become living evidence after half a century if conserved correctly." Recognizing the importance of this work, the FBI sent experts to Tennessee to train the storage team, turning the state system into the standard model for the southeastern United States. From that came the term Russell Standard, the new set of criteria for preserving and digitizing cold case evidence. The process consisted of 7 steps: physical inspection, structural imaging, microbiological sampling, DNA encoding, administrative data entry, legal link verification, and tiered storage. Everything was automated to minimize human error. In the Nashville storage facility, where bright white light reflected off thousands of brand new sealed boxes, each box carried an electronic label displaying the case number, year, evidence type, and preservation status. Alice walked between the shelves and stopped in front of the box labeled Cold Case. #221, Russell. She opened the control panel and watched the 3D image of the child's shoes appear on the screen. Every detail, the stitching, the wear patterns, even specks of dust, was perfectly preserved. She knew that now, no matter how many more years passed, that evidence would remain intact in digital space. The TBI's periodic report to the Federal Department of Justice stated, "The Russell Standard Electronic Storage System has reduced evidence management error rates by 82% and tripled the ability to cross-match DNA samples across states." Tennessee's success quickly spread to neighboring states like Kentucky and Alabama, which began implementing similar models. At the 2017 National Forensic Conference, the Russell case was selected as the case study for resurrecting forensic data, presented as proof that properly preserving just one case could transform the entire national investigative system. Alice sat quietly in the audience, listening as the presenter mentioned her grandfather's name as the one who laid the groundwork for this work. When the presentation ended, she wrote a short line in her notebook, "From one child's shoe we built the archive of the future." In that moment, she understood that the Russell case was not just the story of a child found, it was the legacy ensuring every future piece of evidence would be heard, protected, and retold when time finally allowed. When the Russell Standard Forensic Storage System was publicly announced, the reaction from the Tennessee community and investigators nationwide far exceeded expectation. Local media repeatedly covered the miracle of science and memory, describing the Russell case not merely as an isolated success, but as proof that justice can be restored even when time has buried everything in dust. Civic organizations, retired officers' associations, universities, and missing persons family groups sent letters of congratulations to the TBI. They saw it as the starting point for a new approach, combining genetic science with the perseverance of generations of investigators. Within a year, more than 10 other states announced they would adopt Tennessee's pioneering DNA model, including Kentucky, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Indiana. Those states sent specialists to Nashville to study the electronic evidence storage process and attend training sessions taught by Alice Whitman and her technical team. National media hailed the Legacy DNA Project as one of the 10 most important forensic initiatives in America in 2016, ranking it alongside the FBI's expansion of the CODIS database. For the people of Tennessee, the Russell case became a symbol of rebirth. Dozens of families who had lost loved ones began voluntarily submitting DNA samples, hoping one day to receive answers. The Knoxville community, where it all began in 1963, held a small memorial ceremony in front of the restored Russell family home. On the refurbished front porch, a bronze plaque was placed bearing the words, "Here, memories do not fade." Through faith and science, a child returned after 52 years. Hundreds of residents attended, including forensic science students and young investigators. Alice stood at a distance, said nothing, and simply watched as Michael, now once again Samuel Joseph Russell, bowed his head to thank everyone who had helped bring him home. A month later, the TBI received an invitation from the Federal Department of Justice asking the Russell family to represent found victims and speak at the National Cold Case Conference in Washington, D.C. It was the first time in the conference's history that a case solved entirely through DNA technology was chosen as the centerpiece. In the large auditorium, among hundreds of law enforcement representatives from every state, Samuel and his sister Ruth took the stage and told their story. He spoke briefly, his voice low and steady. "I am proof that memories can be buried, but truth cannot. What kept me alive was not fear, but the love of people who never stopped searching." The entire room rose for prolonged applause. The press called it the speech that silenced America for 3 minutes. After the conference, the Department of Justice announced special funding to expand the National DNA Matching Network using the Tennessee model as its foundation and launched a public awareness campaign titled "Every Name, Every Case," urging citizens to submit biological data to help identify long-term missing persons. The social impact spread rapidly. Public trust in law enforcement was restored. Evidence storage and DNA analysis training programs were formally added to curricula at numerous law and forensic science universities. In Knoxville, once shrouded in guilt and suspicion, people now spoke of the Russell case as a story of hope. The old missing Samuel Russell, age 5 posters were preserved in the Tennessee State Museum as part of the state's heritage. On the wall beside them hung a new photograph of Samuel and Ruth, taken at the national conference, 2 generations of the same story, closing half a century with the belief that no missing persons case is hopeless as long as people keep searching. After the National Cold Case Conference, the life of Samuel Joseph Russell, the man once known as Michael Turner, turned to an entirely new chapter. He officially changed his name back to its legal original in early 2016, reclaiming the surname Russell on every official document from his passport to his Social Security records. A Tennessee court issued him a special certificate that read, "Restoration of original identity per investigation findings and DNA verification, Russell File, 1963." That single sheet of paper, bearing a red seal and the judge's signature, was framed and hung in his living room as proof of a nearly half-century journey to find himself. Although it brought a sense of wholeness, the revealed truth also plunged Samuel into a long period of emptiness. In the first months after the case broke, he often suffered from insomnia, waking in the middle of the night from dreams that blurred the 2 lives he had lived, one as Michael Turner, the boy raised in a little house in Dayton, and one as Samuel Russell, the 5-year-old torn from his family on a summer afternoon in Tennessee. TBI psychologists urged him to join the Reintegration Support Program for childhood abduction survivors, and it was there that he met many others with similar experiences. Those encounters made him realize that surviving and regaining one's identity was not just personal luck, it was also a responsibility to tell the story for others. From mid-2016, Samuel began working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children as a volunteer speaker. At university workshops, he recounted his journey, not to rehash guilt, but to show the power of science and the perseverance of people who refuse to give up. His low, calm, and authentic voice moved many in the audience. He always ended his talks with the same line, "I no longer hate anyone. I only know that if the people who came before me hadn't believed the truth still existed, I wouldn't be standing here." The press began calling him the man who came back, the man who returned after half a century. A photograph of him with his sister Ruth appeared on the cover of Time magazine's special issue on DNA technology under the subheading, "Science Found Him. Hope Found Us." Thanks to that attention, Samuel was invited to collaborate with numerous organizations, including Project Legacy, the nonprofit fund created by the TBI and the Tennessee Department of Justice to support families of the missing. He took no salary, only asking to serve as a witness advisor, teaching communities how to collect and preserve biological samples. Many parents and siblings who had lost loved ones came to him and said they had regained hope after hearing his story. Samuel always answered with humility, "I'm just proof that hope has no expiration date." For his part, he continued living in Dayton. The old house was kept exactly as it had been, with only a few new framed photos added, one of Harold Whitman, the man who first opened the file, and one of Alice, the woman who finally closed the journey. They were the 2 people from 2 different eras who had stitched his life back together. Whenever he had the chance, Samuel drove to Knoxville and stopped by his mother Eleanor's old house, now a small city-managed memorial site. He would sit for hours on the porch steps where the 1963 photograph had been taken, looking down the quiet street and thinking about the woman who had raised him all those years. Though Mary Turner had been wrong, he never saw her as an enemy. In an NBC interview, he said, "I know she had lost her own child, and I was the piece she tried to hold on to so she could survive. If she hadn't taken me, maybe neither of us would have made it." That statement left the studio audience speechless. In 2017, Samuel joined Alice on the TBI's Truth in Time speaking tour, presenting at police academies and law schools across the country. He didn't just tell his personal story, he also spoke about the importance of preserving evidence and sharing DNA data. Everywhere he went, he left a handwritten note. Keep every trace, because somewhere it may be the key that lets someone come home. At the end of that year, he received the U.S. Department of Justice's Citizen Courage Award for raising awareness about DNA identification and missing persons. When he walked on stage to accept it, Samuel said little. He simply thanked those who had believed in him, then looked down at the plaque engraved Samuel Joseph Russell. After so many years, he had truly become himself again. No longer a victim, but a living witness to the power of memory and human kindness. In early 2017, as the media storm around the Russell case finally died down, Alice Whitman returned to her familiar desk job at TBI headquarters in Nashville. On her desk sat a nearly 500-page file, the final summary of Cold Case #221, a case that had spanned more than half a century and been carried forward by 3 generations of investigators. The report was titled The Russell Investigation, 1963-2015. A full timeline and procedural review. She spent weeks reviewing every detail, cross-checking old scene reports with new documents. The first page was the timeline, beginning June 12, 1963. The day Samuel Russell vanished, and ending June 22, 2015, the day the boy's identity was restored. The timeline was divided into 12 phases, clearly marking key milestones. Discovery of evidence, suspension of investigation, Harold Whitman's private archiving of the file, DNA results, the reunion, and subsequent system-wide projects. Alice wrote, "From a single procedural error, the case became a lesson for the entire profession about the critical importance of long-term evidence preservation and data retrieval." The next section was titled, Analysis of Initial Errors, Lessons Learned. There she listed the 3 main reasons the original investigation failed: 1, substandard evidence storage procedures that caused soil samples to degrade and field reports to go missing; 2, lack of interagency coordination that prevented data linking between Knox County and neighboring states; 3, technological limitations of 1960s forensic science that could not analyze DNA or identify biological traces. She added, had a centralized storage system and automated genetic matching existed, the Russell case could have been solved decades earlier. The third part presented system improvement recommendations drawn from the Russell case and the Legacy DNA project. Alice proposed mandatory electronic archiving for every open case from the year 2000 onward, along with a 3-tier oversight mechanism to prevent future loss of evidence. She also stressed the need for an ongoing interstate data sharing network to speed cross-state missing person searches. In the appendix, she listed initiatives already implemented: Russell Standard, Forensic Evidence Storage Protocol, officially adopted in 14 states; Legacy DNA Project, 326 samples banked, 2 successful identifications; Forensic Archiving Reform, 3D Storage System 95% complete. She quoted Samuel Russell's words from the national conference, "Every piece of evidence you keep is a door that lets the truth come home," and used them as the opening to her conclusion. When the report was finished, she presented it to the TBI director and the State Department of Justice. The approval meeting was solemn. The director read the final pages, nodded, and said the Russell case didn't just solve one crime, it reshaped forensic practice across the state. He signed it and stamped in red ink. Case closed, solved and archived. The file was then transferred to Tennessee's Central Historical Case Repository. Alice rode with the transport truck all the way to the archive. When the clerk placed the box on the shelf, she paused for a few seconds, looking at the label, Cold Case #221. Russell, Samuel Joseph, solved. In the cold warehouse, the fluorescent lights glinted off the cover, making the red lettering stand out like a proper ending. She opened her notebook and wrote the final entry. Final summary report completed. All evidence, data, and witnesses verified. No further action required. Russell case officially closed. Then she signed her name, closed the notebook, and walked out, leaving behind not just a complete file, but the crystallized legacy of 3 generations' persistence, proof that justice, however delayed, can still complete its journey when preserved by memory and faith. In September 2017, almost 2 years after Samuel Joseph Russell's identity was restored, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation publicly released the final summary report, declaring Russell case solved after 52 years, the longest-running missing person case in state history to be resolved through DNA technology. The press release stated, opened in 1963, reopened and solved in 2015 through modern genetic matching, confirming the survival of the victim and restoring his legal identity. The Russell case has become a symbol of the value of evidence preservation, forensic technology, and unwavering determination in the pursuit of justice. The file is permanently stored in the National Forensic Archive Center in Nashville under the unique designation TBI, CC-221, 1963, 2015. Inside the archival box are 3 copies: Harold Whitman's original 1963 investigation report, Alice's final 2017 handwritten notes, and a color photograph of Samuel Russell taken at the National Cold Case Conference. Even the lettering on the box cover was embossed to symbolize the endurance of memory. At the release ceremony, the TBI director said, "The Russell case is more than a successful investigation. It is a reminder that justice never expires. Every investigator, every scientist, every mother or sister who waited helped write this ending." In the front row, Alice sat quietly, eyes fixed on the screen, showing the 1963-2015 timeline, glowing like a ribbon of light, linking 2 halves of a century. After the ceremony, she was awarded the Service of Legacy Medal for extraordinary contribution to cold case work. For her, though, the real reward was the peace of knowing that what her grandfather Harold had started had finally found its conclusion. The Russell case became required curriculum at the State Forensic Academy as Case Study #01, DNA Resolution over half a century. Inside the textbook, a short sentence is printed in bold: "Errors may pause justice, but preserved memory and data will bring it back." The photograph of Samuel, the little boy who vanished one Tennessee summer, now appears in DNA identification lessons as a symbol of science's ability to redeem human memory. The media no longer treated the Russell story as crime news. They called it a symphony of trust across generations. That October, Samuel returned to Knoxville for the first time since reclaiming his real name. The quiet city, Maple Street, and the old neighborhood had changed, but the little wooden houses remained, and in the western corner of Riverside Cemetery, his parents' graves lay side by side, their headstones weathered with age. One late autumn afternoon, Samuel brought white flowers and the only black and white photograph from 1963 that showed him smiling innocently. He knelt, placed the bouquet between the 2 stones, and touched the carved words, "Eleanor and John Russell, loving parents." Wind moved through the trees, sending golden leaves drifting slowly. The distant sound of the Tennessee River was the same as ever. He whispered, as if afraid to disturb the silence, "I've come home." His eyes were wet, but his smile was peaceful. In that moment, it felt as though every memory, Eleanor's, Harold's, and all those who had searched, returned and lingered in the warm breeze. From a distance, Alice watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt. She simply looked at the man bowing before the graves, knowing the 52-year journey had truly ended. When Samuel left the cemetery, the late-day sun painted the little road to the river gold. He paused at the water's edge, watching ripples reflect the sky, then took from his pocket a small folded paper, a copy of the gas receipt signed, Mary Turner. He tossed it into the river and let it float away, gradually dissolving in the current. For him it was not a denial of the past, but a way to let go, to bring both lives, Samuel Russell and Michael Turner, to rest inside the same man. Above, dusk settled, dyeing the Tennessee River red. There, in peace and silence. The story that began in 1963 finally closed. In the Nashville archive, the box labeled Russell Case, solved after 52 years, sits on a metal shelf among hundreds of other cases. But for everyone who ever touched it, it is not merely evidence of the past. It is proof of the enduring human power to seek truth. And out on the sunlit, windy, memory-filled land of Tennessee, life goes on, carrying the simple message the Russell Case left for future generations. Nothing is ever lost, as long as someone remembers and as long as there are hands to pass the torch of faith. The story of Samuel Joseph Russell, the boy who disappeared in 1963 and was found after 52 years, is not only a detective journey, it is a profound mirror for American society today, a place where memory, science, and compassion intersect to preserve faith and justice. In an age when personal data, DNA, and forensic technology have become commonplace tools, the Russell Case reminds us that technology only gains true meaning when it is used to restore human dignity. Without Harold Whitman's determination in 1963, without his granddaughter Alice inheriting that responsibility, and without the advances of the National DNA Project, Samuel might have remained forever a forgotten name. The story also reflects a core American value, the spirit of never giving up, the belief that justice, however late, will arrive. In an era when information spreads instantly and human emotions are easily get swept into media whirlwinds, the Russell saga urges patience, respect for the past, and trust in verified truth. Moreover, Samuel's forgiveness of Mary Turner, the woman who abducted and raised him, demonstrates the power of mercy to rise above judgment, something today's politically, racially, and ideologically divided America still needs. From this story, each of us can draw a simple lesson. Preserve records, memories, and even the smallest fragments of life, because sometimes those seemingly trivial things are what save a person, reunite a family, or, as Tennessee has done, reshape an entire justice system. Thank you for joining me on Samuel Russell's story, proof that justice can be found, even if it takes more than half a century. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring cases solved through faith, memory, and the power of people on the endless journey to find truth.